Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15. This is another of Paul's prison letters. And we have still other ones that he wrote while in prison, 2 Timothy as well. He suffered greatly for his faith, but his faith shines out beautifully anyway. So we're going to pick it up at verse 15 and read that paragraph from 15 through verse 20, which speaks about Jesus. So, Catherine, would you like to begin? And we'll read until we finish verse 20.
The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation.
For in him all things were created.
Created.
Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether throne and all power, all ruler, all several authorities. All things has been created through him and for him.
He is before all things, and in him all things hold together.
And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the
supremacy.
For God was pleased to have all his fullness, dwell in him,
and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross.
Shed on the cross.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Nice to see you. Good. So we're in Colossians 1 and verse 15. We've just read the first paragraph through verse 20. If you recall, we finished last week reading verses 13 and 14, where Paul said that he has rescued us. He's talking about Jesus. He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So in that brief statement, those two verses, he talks about what Jesus has accomplished. That he has moved us who have faith in him from one realm or dominion, it's another word, so those words are synonyms, realm or dominion, and they refer to a territory that is ruled by someone. So Paul has said what Jesus has accomplished is moving us from one realm to another.
Sorry.
That's okay, welcome. With the more snow, parking is a problem, and now it's cold. So Jesus has moved those who have faith in him from one realm or dominion or territory ruled from one to another. And he's moved us from the dominion of darkness to the kingdom of Jesus. So kingdom would be another synonym there. Do it, yeah. So kingdom would be yet another synonym, realm, dominion, kingdom. And you can see in this word, it's related to the word dominate. To dominate would be to overwhelm. Realm is related to the word rule, to rule. And kingdom has a king, of course. So those are synonyms. So what Jesus has accomplished, he's moved us from one to to another, from darkness to light, from Satan to the rule of Jesus. And now with verse 15, he talks about who Jesus is. And he says he is the image of the invisible God. Let's think about that word image. Oops. Those words. He's used the word image. We also have the word imagine, a verb to imagine, and the noun imagination. Children tend to have a wonderful imagination. They can picture almost any possibility in their heads. As we grow older, our imagination gets crushed by life or something, so we don't have quite the imagination. But you can see these words are related. There's Pedro, an old friend. Image. So on a coin, I don't have any change with me, but on a coin, a quarter or a loonie or something, there is an image on there. Usually it's the image, I haven't seen one yet of the king. I think anybody have a coin? Whose image is on the coin? Mr. Trump one day. No, I hope not. So whose image is on the coin? Okay, that is the queen. Yeah, and that also is the queen. So that's what an image is. A good synonym would be reflection.
这是多少钱？
这是1块，就2块是那个2个颜色的，1块是1个颜色，一个黄色。
2块大一些。
So everyone has the queen. Does anyone have the king? Maybe they're not in circulation yet. So a synonym would be reflection, image or reflection. Another word would be likeness. These would all be synonyms. Image, reflection, likeness. And this is common, I think, in all countries, that they will have coins in circulation, money, and usually in our case, it's the queen, the monarch, that will be on our coins. In the United States, it will vary. It will be usually a president, George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or someone like that. Okay, question for you. What image is on coins in China?
Coin.
Or do you use coins?
Planet flower.
Oh, just a flower,
Yeah,
so
coin
not a
is a
person.
Yeah, coin is flower. But
Okay.
cash is Mao.
Oh, Mao is
Yeah.
on the cash. Okay, it would be the same thing. It would be an image. His picture, that would be another synonym, picture. In each case, in all of those synonyms, it's not the real thing, but rather it points to the real thing. In other words, the actual queen is not on the coin, but it's a picture or an image, a reflection, a portrait, a likeness of the queen. And I think in most countries, it draws the people's attention to who is important. Mao, or Queen Elizabeth, or Benjamin Franklin. I think on large paper money in the United States, it might be, is it a $100 bill, I think has Benjamin Franklin on it. So important people. So it points to them in some way.
Dead present. Dead present.
A bad
Dead.
Oh,
Dead
dead. Yeah, they're all dead. The people on there are all dead. That's true. Here, Paul is saying that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So, invisible meaning it cannot be seen with our eyes. In the ancient world, unlike our modern world, they took it for granted. They simply assumed that there are unseen spiritual powers and realities. I think in our day, not everyone believes in unseen powers or realities. The worldview of the Bible, though, assumes that. I believe it as well. Some people who are deep in science don't. It's a very good question. I think there are still many people, though, who are scientists. I know many of them, or I know some, who are Christians who do believe in reality that is beyond the material. Actually, that's another word you could learn if you don't already know it. You know either of those words, metaphysical or metaphysics? Metaphysics. The word meta in this case means beyond. Physics is a study in science, right? Physics. And metaphysical refers to a realm beyond the physical, or things that cannot be measured or touched or seen or examined and so on, the metaphysical. So just a question for you. Thoughts. Are thoughts real? Do you know what I mean by thoughts? The verb to think. Process in our mind. So our thoughts are what we are thinking about. Are thoughts real? You're shaking your head. Thoughts aren't real?
Not real.
I think it's real.
What do you think? Are thoughts... You're thinking about this right now. Is your thinking real?
I think it's real.
Thoughts would be in the realm of the metaphysical. We can examine our brain. Can we open a brain and see a mind? Can we open a brain and see the thoughts? No. So where do thoughts exist? Where do they exist? If they are real, they exist somewhere.
We can examine it by a EKG, electronic encephalogram. So it will be electric waves.
We can see and measure waves in the brain, but the person reading the ECG cannot say, "Oh, they were thinking about back home in China." No, we cannot. So where do these thoughts exist? This is, to my mind, just an example of the metaphysical, that there are realities beyond the physical that we cannot measure or see. Our only access to them is if the person tells us what they are thinking. We experience this with our children sometimes. We know something is bothering them, so I might ask my son or my daughter when they were small, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." And I have no access to that unless they will tell me what they are thinking. What about, this is maybe a subcategory. Are worries real?
Of course, it's real. No.
You don't think they're real? Well, this is a difficult question because often things we worry about never come to pass. They never come into reality. But in the moment, when we are worried, it does affect us.
Yes, the
doesn't it?
emotion is real.
Yeah, emotions. Yeah, and again, emotions would be another thing that I think are in the metaphysical realm. We can measure certain things. We know someone is sad or happy or angry or worried and so on. But those worries exist almost, I think, in a metaphysical realm. And they may never happen. They are really our inner reaction. So my point is that human beings, even apart from God and powers, human beings are more complicated than simply physical beings, aren't we? We have dreams. Are dreams real? They may never happen, but I think dreams are real to us. If we have dreams of whatever, of getting our PR.
Yeah.
And yet, where do they exist, these dreams? In our mind, we could say, but that doesn't tell us very much, does it? Because even the word mind we have these two words in English. Our brain is a physical, I don't know, is it, what you would call it?
Organ.
Organ, I guess it's an organ, sure, it's an organ. Our brain, and we can measure waves in the brain. We've learned certain things happen in one part of our brain and other things. One is the site of thinking, one is the site of emotion, and so on. We know things about the brain, but we have this other word, mind. And we use that word mind to talk about the processes within the brain, our inner life, our inner world. All of us have an inner world. Right? An inner world that cannot be seen by anyone else, but is very real to us, isn't it? All the things that go on all the time within our brain, we call that our mind. But what is it? Where is it? Where is your mind? Our mind cannot exist without the brain, but the mind is more than the brain, isn't it? It's this inner reality of who we are. Anyway, I'm probably over-stressing this, but it seems even for those in our modern world, a world of science, that say, I only believe in what science can teach. Even, I think we have to admit that life is more complicated, isn't it, than simply having a brain. We sometimes use words like these. And in the Greek language and the Hebrew, the word spirit, we'll talk about what is a spirit, but in Greek, and I believe in Hebrew as well, the word in Greek, it's pneuma, can be translated spirit, it can be translated breath, it can be translated wind, depends on the context. Can you see the wind? No, you can see the effect of the wind, and we know what it is, the movement of air. Breath, we know what that is. I mean, we all breathe, but you can't really see it, the breath. And spirit, we often say human beings have a spirit. Sometimes we're talking about personality. That person has a happy spirit, or a sad or melancholic spirit. And we're talking about what animates them. What to animate means to give life or movement, so on. So we talk about an inanimate object would be one which cannot move. But the breath, the spirit, animates us. We have life and we move and so on. But you cannot see our spirit. Sometimes we refer to it as spirit, not simply personality, happy, sad, melancholic, but rather the life, the animating force within human beings. So when we die, the spirit leaves, or there's no spirit anymore when we die. But a living person, breathing person, we say has a spirit. We sometimes use that word soul. What are the words in Mandarin for soul and spirit, or do you distinguish? Do you have?
So, 灵魂, spirit, 精神. So soul might be a deeper spirit. I don't know how to distinguish these two.
I don't know if anybody knows how to distinguish them. We have the same trouble. Both words are used in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. And usually we refer to the soul as something deeper than the spirit. The spirit is the breath of life, but soul refers to usually something that is deeper and lasts. That you can kill the body, but the soul continues in some way. And that would be in Chinese culture as well. You would understand something like that. Again, what is a soul, though? This is metaphysical again. We're talking about a reality that is beyond the physical. Okay, I hope I've convinced you of the biblical worldview that even for science people, there's plenty of obvious evidence that life is more than just what science can measure. And science has very limited access to the soul or to the thoughts or dreams of a person and what animates us. The Bible takes for granted that there is a God who is invisible. We cannot see him. And it makes perfect sense that if there is a creator beyond the creation, he is not contained within the creation. How could we see him? He is beyond. So Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So when you see Jesus, you see what God is like. That's really what Paul is saying. If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. That's what he's saying here. He is the image. Sometimes, I'll teach you another expression. I don't know where this comes from. It's a weird expression. spitting image. So we don't usually say the ing well, we say spitting image. Spitting image. You know what it is to spit? It's saliva. So I don't know why this comes, but sometimes people think that my son looks a lot like me. So in this expression you might say, my son Jeremy is the spitting image of his father. The spitting image of his father. So what that means is the resemblance is very close, very much. You think, oh, they look so much alike. That's what it means, spitting image. So in a sense, when Paul talks about Jesus is the image of the invisible God, he's saying they're just alike. They're really alike. You know what God is like when you see Jesus. And he is the firstborn over all creation. I need to think about that word, firstborn. He's the firstborn over all creation. Put another word up here. The word heresy. Christians, having experienced Jesus and the life Jesus gives, wrestled with how to describe Jesus. And eventually they came to say that Jesus is fully God and fully man. How can that be? How can anyone be fully God and fully man? If they are fully God, they're not man. If they're fully man, they're not God. But somehow Jesus is both fully God and fully man. A heresy is a departure from orthodox faith. A heresy is a belief that is not biblical, that is a departure or goes away from what Christians have believed from the beginning. And one heresy was that when Paul says Jesus was firstborn, that must mean he's less than God. He did not always exist because he was born. But that's not what Paul is saying here. There was a heresy called Arianism early in the church, where some Christians thought that Jesus was less than the Father. And it was argued against that is not the case. So when Paul says Jesus was the firstborn over all creation, he is not saying that Jesus once didn't exist and then was born and began to exist over creation. He's using firstborn in a different sense. The firstborn had rights that subsequent children didn't have in the ancient world. I suspect that was probably the case in China as well, that the firstborn son would inherit land, and others, what about other sons or daughters? They would not inherit as much.
Little part of.
A little part. Often in the Old Testament, the firstborn would inherit a double portion, twice as much as anyone else. We call that, don't worry about this, the law of primogeniture, which means the firstborn has more rights. So that's the sense in which Paul is using it, that while Jesus is fully human and fully God, he is the supreme one over all creation. That's really all he's saying there. He's the firstborn over all creation. Later he says he's the firstborn from the dead, the first to rise from the dead of many others. But he's not commenting on Jesus being his essence, but rather his importance. That's really what he's saying. So he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for by him all things were created. The Gospel of John says the same thing, that Jesus is the one who created all things. The Father created through the Son. So he created all things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. So Paul again is pointing to creation has elements that are visible and elements that are invisible in creation, and that Jesus created them all, seen and unseen, visible and invisible. That's what he's saying about Jesus. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, these are all synonyms for powers that rule. That's just 4 different ways of talking about invisible and visible powers. So a visible power visible power would be So visible powers would include President Trump. He has certain powers, though the courts are trying to restrict some of the things he is doing. President Xi would be a visible power, wouldn't he? He does have power. He exercises power. But Satan would be an invisible power, and the other invisible powers would be angels. Angels would be beings that we cannot see that also were created by Jesus. And Satan we usually understand as a fallen angel, one who rebelled against God and is using powers against God in rebellion. And again, in our worldview, do we believe in invisible powers? Yep, I do too. I don't think we want to dwell on this, and there's much we don't understand, but the Bible takes for granted that there are dark powers. I think even in our scientific age, most humans still believe in dark powers. And I say that even beyond Christians. I say that because we have a fascination with dark powers. So when I think of some of the most successful books or movies, have any of you read the Harry Potter series? Okay?
The Dark Lord.
Yeah, the Dark Lord. Yeah. And that, how many people read those? All my granddaughters read them. I've read all but one now, just so that I know their world. But I think probably millions of people have read with fascination the Harry Potter series. And it's a struggle between good and evil, and darkness and light. And it takes for granted that there's more going on than simply humans. And of course, in Harry Potter's world, there are wizards and witches and and some have gone bad and fight against the good, and so on. It's a power struggle. Why is that so popular? Well, they're good stories, but I think it touches something in us, doesn't it? That we sense that even in our own lives there is a struggle between darkness and light, between good and evil. We know what it is to do what is wrong, and we know the temptation to the dark side. Do you know the play and movie Phantom of the Opera? Very popular American film, beautiful music and so on. But it's this, there's a song in there where the Phantom, who wears this mask on his face, tries to attract the main female character over into the darkness with him. And it's a powerful song, and you can sense how that works, how darkness tries to pull us in. I think we recognize that, don't we, at some level? Or Star Wars. If you watch the Star Wars movies with Darth Vader and the Emperor against Luke Skywalker and the Force, and the Force for good against darkness. Again, very popular. Millions of people have watched those movies, and you could give more and more examples. I think that that literature is so popular because it resonates with our heart and with our experience of life, that we know there is such a thing as darkness. And I don't mean the absence of light, I mean an evil force. So, anyway, Jesus, says Paul, created all things, even all those powers, but he didn't create them to be bad, but some have rebelled in some sense and resisted. Then he says, all things were created by him and for him. Interesting. All things were created for Jesus to rule and to perhaps reflect his glory and beauty. And then verse 17, he is before all things, that is, he always existed before creation, and in him all things hold together. In Jesus, all things hold together. To become a pastor, I attended McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, at their Divinity College, and that is their motto. If you know that word, motto. Motto. Yeah, a motto is a theme thought, a thought that characterizes this group of people. So the motto of McMaster Divinity College is, in Christ all things hold together. In Christ all things hold together. That's its motto or theme verse. And what Paul is saying there is that without Jesus creating power and what we call sustaining power, the verb is to sustain. That means to keep things going. Without Jesus' sustaining power, the world would not exist. It would stop. Again, science would say, I'm not sure about that. No, things will continue to exist no matter what. But Paul is saying, no, actually Jesus holds it all together and keeps it running. Again, he's saying great things about Jesus. Then he says, he is the head of the body, the church. Let's think about that word head. It can mean two things. Actually, three things. So the word head can refer to a body part that contains our brain and our face and so on. I think it's spelled chief wrong. I don't know. Even I struggle with IE sometimes, which order, but who is the head of your department? Meaning, who's in charge? Who's the chief? Who's the boss? So head can mean boss, but head can also mean source from which things flow. The source of a river, something like that, can be the head as well. I think it's even used on a ship to refer to the bathroom is called the head for some reason. But anyway, here Paul is saying that Jesus is the head of the body, the church. This is a metaphor that the church is Jesus' body. So Jesus' body, Jesus is not living physically on the earth anymore, though he was raised from the dead and is with the Father. But the church, Argyle Road Church, First Baptist Church, they are Jesus' body. He is the head, but we are the body. So as I have hands and feet and legs and so on to do things, so Jesus is the head, and the church lives out Jesus' life now on earth. That's the intention. That's what Paul is saying, that Jesus is the head of the church, his body. He's the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. So he is the first to be raised from the dead, but all of us will be raised from the dead one day. There will be a general resurrection, coming back to life. Again, in our scientific age, many people say, no, that's when you're dead, you're dead. My father is not a Christian. He believes that when he dies, his body will rot in the ground, turn to dust, and there's nothing more. I believe he's wrong. There will be that we will go to be with the Lord or be excluded from the Lord's presence, and one day Jesus will return and there will be resurrection and we will come back to life, so that everything he might have the supremacy. So we've got that word. The adjective is supreme, and supremacy would be a state of being. So to be supreme would be the best, to be the very best. Interesting, there was once a group of singers, 3 ladies, and they chose for their name the Supremes. A bit arrogant, isn't it? A bit proud to say, we are the Supremes. But anyway, Jesus would have the supremacy. It means there is no one above him. He is the head. He is the top. He is the ruler. And then verse 19, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. Again, to see Jesus is to see God in human form. All the fullness of God, the character of God is there in Jesus. It's a magnificent paragraph. And then verse 20, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. Reconcile. To reconcile is the verb, reconciliation is the noun. So when we talk about reconciliation, the assumption is, or the presupposition is, that there is division. There is a breaking of relationship. So to reconcile is to bring what should be together back together. So we use that with husband and wife. With sometimes they separate, a husband and wife. And we work toward reconciliation, to bring them back into harmony, back together again. Sometimes we need reconciliation with our children. If a child rebels and goes away, is angry or something. Every family knows this challenge. I think it's somewhere, that reconciliation. Sometimes people have hurt feelings and resentments that need reconciliation. Paul is assuming a couple of things. One, that all of creation has gotten into problems and separation. Humans, but even beyond humans, we need reconciliation with creation. That is, humans may be guilty of exploiting the natural world. And how many species have gone extinct or are endangered right now? Species of creatures. Because humans perhaps have been careless, thoughtless, so on. So Paul is assuming that all of creation needs reconciling. Not just human to human. But we also need reconciliation not only within families, but within nations. Oh, and we see that everywhere in our world, don't we? Within nations, there's civil war in Sudan right now, Myanmar, and then Russia, Ukraine, and on and on. It's terrible how badly our world needs reconciliation. And again, it's huge. And Paul is assuming even with dark powers, and to go back to Harry Potter, the darkness has to be dealt with. The darkness has to be, there can be no reconciliation without defeating the darkness. And I suppose there can be no reconciliation in our families without defeating the darkness in us. That's really what Paul is saying. But he's saying that Jesus on the cross reconciled to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven. That is, even dark powers, rebellious powers. He's reconciled all things, or at least made reconciliation possible. And how has Jesus done that? He has done that through his blood shed on the cross. And there is much mystery here, but Christianity has said from the beginning that Jesus' cross accomplished something. His dying on the cross accomplished this reconciliation. It dealt with the darkness and with sin and made harmony possible for all creation. Let's look at that word, shed. You see this word often regarding Jesus' death on the cross and his dying. The word shed can be a noun referring to a small building that you put tools in. So we have a garden shed in the backyard. You put your lawnmower in there and your rakes and shovels and things. So that is a small structure, small building to store things. People don't live in sheds normally, unless they're very poor or something. But as a verb, it means to get rid of something. So if I shed my sweater, I'll take it off. That would be to shed my sweater. We can shed our past, leave it behind, move forward. In a sense, you have shed your life in China for a new life in Canada. You've left it behind, you've taken it off and left it there. You moved on. That is to shed, to get rid of. Well, here it's used it means simply to bleed and die. To shed his blood means Jesus died for us. And that was the means by which he is reconciling all things. I don't think anyone can explain how this is so, but God says it is so. I have done this by these means, by Jesus dying on the cross. He's made reconciliation possible. And I think at our best we recognize the truth of this as Christians, because we recognize that because of our love for Jesus and Jesus in us, we begin to work toward reconciliation. We feel a peace with God because he has forgiven us, and we long for peace with others, and we begin to work toward reconciliation with others, and we begin to long for it for our world. So we feel the work of Jesus in us toward reconciliation. Well, we're almost out of time here, so I'll just close with something that a scholar named Stanley Gren said. Something for you to think about. When God is finished, a redeemed people redeemed creation this is really what Paul is saying. This man named Stanley Grens. That's supposed to be an R. Stanley Grens. So, to summarize what God is doing through Jesus and through the whole story of the Bible, he is redeeming all things. So when God is finished, he will have a redeemed people. Remember, to redeem means to set free. As in, if someone was a slave and someone bought their freedom, they are redeemed. Of a redeemed people, a people who are free to be who we were created to be, the kind of good people we were created to be. You'll have a redeemed people living in a redeemed creation with their Redeemer, with Jesus. So the creation will be set free and be right again. His people will be set free and will be all that we were meant to be, and we will live under the headship of our Redeemer, Jesus. That's really what Paul is saying here too. Stanley Gren said that roughly. I'm paraphrasing. Okay, we didn't get very far today, but we did a marvelous paragraph about who Jesus is and what he has accomplished in Colossians 1:15-20. Any questions, comments,
Excuse me.
thoughts?
Excuse me, what's the last word?
Redeemer.
No.
Oh, Grenz. Grenz.
That's it. Thank you.
My writing is quite sloppy.
哦，一个人名儿是吗？
He was
一个
a,
人的姓
yeah,
last
he was
name
a Baptist theologian who taught at Regent College in Vancouver. He died of a heart attack, I think, but a few years ago. No, a few years ago. Yeah, he's been dead a while. A very good man.
How
So
did you know
that's-
that?
老师说的，
我是刚说的。
刚说的。
So that is our hope as well,
Okay, thank you.
to be part of that. So, okay, we'll finish with that then today, and we'll pick it up at verse 21 next week.